except for Andy. Andy will be here just later, right? And Steve Wright is not coming. Okay. All right. Call the meeting to order. Welcome, Steve Van Leeuwen, a new member. Looking forward to hearing from you when the time comes. And I hope you find it very interesting. This is all very interesting. So we shall see what happens going forward. First item is, anybody have a disclosure of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act for today's agenda? Hearing none, go on to approval of the minutes. The minutes were attached. Anybody have any concerns, issues, modifications? All right, seeing none, I guess we can assume by consensus that they're approved. Takes us into approval of the agenda. Are we good with the agenda the way it's laid out? All right, good. Okay, ready to go then. Okay, so our action items. 5.1, Mariana, tell us about what the students have been doing in terms of our attainable housing targets.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair Don, and good morning to everybody. So, as you know, we've been working with the University of Guelph students on the Attainable Housing project, and they have submitted a report a little bit later, a little bit delayed. So we received it late last week, and we're still going through it. So that's why you don't really have it before you, but we do expect you to have the full report by the next meeting. And I have confirmed with the students that they are available to present it at the meeting. So at least one or two of them will be available. So I think that would be a good opportunity for them and for us to be able to ask them questions if needed. So I'll just put that out there. And then I will go through some of the sort of key points that have been made in the report. And I think it would be good for the committee to have these points and be able to discuss them a little bit today if needed, and just to see where they're at. So they did a lot of background research and used census data and also data specific to Center Wellington. That's more recent. Census data, unfortunately, dates back to 2016 now. So can be updated as we work our way forward through new census information as it comes forward. But for now, a lot of the census data, again, is a little bit dated, but they did look at demographic data and then market analysis as well for housing trends. So some of the main points are that the median income is rising. So we based a lot of information on median income because we thought that was the most comparable data, I guess, most accurate anyway, and not as skewed as what average might be for Center Wellington. So they provided median income in Center Wellington as being, and I'll give you the number, 92,000 is the average household median income. And what they've done, so actually, let me just go through the definition that they've come up with for attainable housing. So we can sort of start there, and then I can use some of the data they've provided if we want to get into more detail. But from their analysis, they started with the definition of affordable and then looked at what that means in Center Wellington and how that can be extrapolated for our discussion of what attainable is. So the definition that they've come up with for attainable housing is housing that costs 30% of a household's gross income, with the household income being between 80 and 120% of local median income. So there's the range there of what median income is, and then what would be affordable. But also beyond financial considerations, the housing should accommodate a variety of needs and lifestyles while being both available and affordable. So that's the definition, the working definition that they have come up with. I'll give you a little bit more on that, and then we can maybe open it up for some discussion. But in terms of that definition, what does it look like is comprising of a diverse housing stock by ensuring that housing density targets balance scale of single family housing and multi-unit cluster housing. So attainable housing would encompass a range of multi-unit or clustered housing types in between single family or single detached homes and mid-rise housing. So what they have determined or information they've provided is that this is called sort of missing middle housing. And there's a lot of documentation now that we can find elsewhere online that refers to this missing middle housing. I think the salient point there is that it's not just whereas affordable housing targets specific populations, mostly low-income earners or seniors. Attainable housing is for generally targeting middle-income earners. So it's not just vulnerable populations, but sort of the general population. In addition, the attainable housing targets the needs of underserved populace whose income levels and employment demography exclude them from owning and renting housing at the market rate. So that sort of further augments what we were talking about, is that these generally the missing middle is they're being excluded from market rate housing. And as we all know, real estate prices have gone up considerably. And actually a couple of other points I should make is that Center Wellington, while in the province 70% of home people own homes, 70% own homes, in Center Wellington is 82%. So it's significantly higher than the provincial average of home ownership in terms of percentage. The other key point is the cost of housing and how much it has risen. So the 2016, it's not actually house values, but listing prices. In 2016, median list price was $360,000. In 2021, $850,000. So a very, very significant jump in housing prices. And then one other thing I'll add is just, there was some comparison or some information that was obtained from other areas, and South Georgian Bay had done a market and household analysis. And I think we can talk about whether something like that would be beneficial to us in Center Wellington to understand what household income levels look like in Center Wellington for full-time and part-time workers. In South Georgian Bay, they did actually do a study, and I don't know how the information was obtained, if it was done through surveying or some kind of market analysis, but they went through various hourly wages, annual household incomes to determine what it looked like in their community. So it might be worthwhile to do something like that in our community to determine what the benchmark should be for maximum ownership price and maximum monthly rentals. So the definition that they used, if we look at our median income, what I can tell you is that they have actually divided it up, and it's quite beneficial to us. And I think it would be our starting point when we take our median income, household income of $92,000. When we look at 80% between that range that we have between 80 and 120%, what we're looking at is annual costs of in the range of $22,000 to $33,000 per year. That's sort of our what we would look at annually for the cost of housing. So we have some tangible numbers, and we're doing a little more work now. We will be doing some more work with the students to sort of finalize this report and bring forward some more facts and sort of data numbers that talk about what that means with the median list price for a home in Centre Wellington. And then to get to our targets, I think we need to do a further analysis of so where we're at with these median household incomes, and then what we have online for our new subdivisions and new housing for our numbers, and then looking at our targets. So our growth for short, medium, and long-term targets. We know how many households we're expecting and what population we're expecting. So I think we need to do some work in extrapolating some of this data to say what does that mean in terms of a target for housing. So how many units do we have? What is the expected unit type and range? So what kind of values would we be looking at? And then how many units do we need of certain types if we can get down to that level? And then where would our deficit be so that we could start to get to what the target numbers are, and then what might the deficit be, and what would be the most appropriate solution to meeting that deficit. Two of the key, I'll just end with this, two of the key major findings that came out of the report are that, number one, housing ownership costs have to decrease to align with the median income earners. And that's with what they found is that the current median housing price in Centre Wellington far exceeds 120%. So that's even the top end of our median range. And then the number two, the conclusion is that the stock of rental units must increase. The current cost aligns with median housing, current rental costs. But however, the stock is not meeting the current demand. So there's two issues there. It's the housing pricing is just too high. And then for rental units, we just don't have enough in terms of demand. So that's the sort of summary of what's in the report. And as I said, we will be finalizing mostly with the target numbers and trying to get a sense of how we should go about doing that, setting the targets. And then we'll have a final report to you for the next meeting, and could have the students there to present it as well. So I'll open it up for discussion now, and or any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very interesting. Does anybody have any comments or questions for Mariana? Mayor Linton.
Yeah, just a couple comments. Really like where this is going, Mariana. I know this group really wants to jump to action really quickly, but we have to figure out the foundation, what our target is first, so that we're moving in the right direction. And this is perfect. I mean, at the end of the day, we need to know what we're driving towards as far as the target goes. And we're taking a very deliberate path to getting there, where I think we're asking the right questions. And I like where this is going, and looking forward to that report next month, because that's going to provide the foundation for what we're doing from now on. And just talking a little bit about where Brett's going to go with this. In his next report, and tying it back to what Mariana and her and the team of students have done, really making sure that we drive towards action. And I think we have a really great group pulled together here, and we can do some really good work here to make sure that we're driving to recommendations that go to council to kind of hit that missing middle target. And again, recognizing that the township plays in different space than the county plays. The county is about affordable housing. We want to make sure that we define what attainable housing is, and then do some real good work to establishing some recommendations. So that gets into what Brett's going to talk about. But what I want to just to kind of impress on the group here is the urgency that we have with this committee. We need to make a difference. This is a real issue in Centre Wellington, where people who want to live here can't afford to live here. So this group here has been pulled together to make a difference, and to make sure that we're getting to action as effectively and efficiently as possible. And that's the thing that matters most to me, and the thing that matters most to people in our community. So I'm looking forward to this group rolling up their sleeves and you know, getting into a couple subcommittees and doing some really good work with our staff to come up with recommendations as fast as possible to make a difference here. And that's exciting to me because I think we're on the right track. And what I'm hearing from Mariana is we're asking the right questions to set the foundation right. And from now, and once we get that report, we can move into what can we do about it. And that's the biggest question. What can we do about the challenge that we're facing? And I think we're on the right path, and I think we got the right team here. That's all I need to say, Don.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Any other questions or comments for Mariana? Mariana, I just have one question. I think it's just more to be clarifying, because you've kind of alluded to both things. When we talk about a target, are we talking about ultimately dollar figures and costs of different types of housing? Or are we talking about numbers of units based on the population and the demographics? Or are we talking about both of those things ultimately when we have targets?
Yes, through you, I think we are trying to establish a monthly range, so dollar figures, and then types of units. If we can get into, I think it really is going to come down to that it needs to be a range of housing, because there are many other documents and initiatives happening even globally, right? So the 15-minute city, the happy city. So we know that densification, there's a lot of data that shows that densification and intensification is positive and is needed. So what we're looking at is if we're going to have people aging in place and we want to be able to provide a range of housing for all different household types, because we get into, you know, single family houses, double, you know, 2-parent, singles, like just the whole range. It needs to be a vast range. It can't just be what ours predominantly has been single detached, and that's the way some of our policies have been written. So I think we're looking at a broad range for sure. So we're going to try to get at both if we can, the financials as well as what it looks like in form.
Okay, yes. And are we going to, when we're talking about forms, are we going to talk about, because again, looking back on it, a target is a metric to measure what you've achieved. Are we going to talk in terms of numbers of these different types of housing, numbers in the range? So numbers of apartment units, numbers of townhouses, that kind of thing. Is that going to be part of a target?
I'm not sure if we can get into that level of detail. I think we can try, but I think it's somewhat difficult, and maybe Brett can speak to this too, somewhat difficult to be able to control that necessarily. We could get into what an ideal range might look like, and whether we would require that in, for example, new subdivisions or even in infill. I'm not sure how. I guess the answer is I don't know yet. It's still a little bit unclear as to exactly what the targets will look like, but we can discuss further. And if we arrange into subcommittees and that, we could have some of the members looking at this type of target and what would be most appropriate. I'm just not sure how. We want to ultimately have something we can measure at the end of the day, right? So that's where I'm just not 100% sure about the answer to that, and for number of units or specific type of number of units.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Michael.
On the subject of targets, and fully appreciating what Mariana was just saying about the difficulty in setting targets for specific building typologies, because in many ways that's dependent on the proposals that are brought forward to the township. I think there's real value in setting targets for the number of rental units, because I thought the percentage, the extremely high percentage of ownership versus rental was quite revealing. That really jumped out at me from the background work that the students have. So having a target for rental, regardless of what the building typology is, I think would hold value.
Okay, thank you. I think that's kind of what we were looking at. Anybody else? All right, thank you very much, Mariana. We look forward to getting into this in a little more detail at the next meeting. Thank you. Next item, Brett. I guess you're the next 3 items.
Thank you, Don. So at the last meeting, we had some discussion and direction given to me to try and prioritize the remaining recommendations that are in the county attainable housing strategy. So this group is clearly, we know that getting the target was our highest priority, and then, how do we act on that? And so looking at the other recommendations and what is the priority for us going forward. So I decided to pull together the list of recommendations, and I found they were conveniently divided into 2 types. One were sort of the policy recommendations, and the other side was the financial incentive recommendations. So I think it seems clear to me, and the student work will help in this regard. When it comes to the private sector building housing and what research I've done, and this will come out in the student report as well, we have affordable housing. There's typically a presumption that that is government subsidized housing. So, for example, the housing that the County of Wellington might build would cover the affordable housing, even though there's probably not enough of that going to meet the demand. But to get at the attainable housing, the presumption is that the attainable housing is provided by the private sector. But I think it's clear, and actually Michael had sent some information between the meetings, that the private sector will need a financial incentive in order to provide the attainable housing at the rate that we need, especially when we hear that the students have discovered clearly the new housing being built on the ownership level is not at the attainable price. So there's one set of recommendations in the county study. I attached the entire study just so that everybody had a chance to read it, the whole thing, because before we've just presented the recommendations part. And there's a lot of good data in the full county report. And so Devlin suggested it's more likely to get everybody's attention and read it if we attached the entire report. So that's really the only reason that's there, for people as we go forward to refer back to that for some of the background data. Then the other set of recommendations are more on, changing the zoning bylaw, what the counties call the policy side. What do we need in terms of OP provisions? What do we need in terms of looking at our zoning bylaw to try to improve affordability? And that could be, tweaking the parking regulations. A lot of municipalities are eliminating or reducing the parking requirements. The other one is, even just looking at minimum lot sizes, minimum frontages, side yard requirements. What can be done to make a smaller unit that's more likely to be attainable viable? But I also see that there's a connection between the two, because some of the things that Mariana just mentioned, for example, our limitation on the ability to control sort of tenure for rental housing, or to control or regulate the price that market housing sells at. The province is now, with Bill 108, tied inclusionary zoning, for example, to the incorporation in municipal rules as of the development permit system. So in order to have inclusionary zoning, which would require a certain percentage of housing in a new development to be attainable or affordable or at a certain price, we have to have a development permit system in place in order to do that. So there's definitely, I think, two streams, and that's why my report suggests that we create two different subcommittees, one that can focus on the financial incentive side of things, and one that can focus on the zoning development permit side of things. And then when we come forward, we'll be able to marry those two together, because to some degree, one is dependent on the other. In terms of the financial incentive side, one of the most, well, clearly the only one of the few tools that we have at the municipal level in order to provide a financial incentive is through a community improvement plan. We have one community improvement plan already, but that is meant to mainly cover the commercial districts. Does have a minor housing component in terms of you can get a grant for adding apartments above retail space, but it doesn't cover, new developments that might include attainable housing. So I think for sure the easiest and best way to provide any financial incentive is through a CIP. So the city of Belleville has undertaken a housing CIP, and I attached a copy of that for our, as we go forward, we'll have that Belleville model as a reference for CIP. CIP process-wise, they're not, they can be challenging to implement, but the procedural requirements are similar to an official plan amendment at the local level. So it's not terribly complicated in terms of trying to complete a housing CIP. We also know that the county is interested in a housing CIP. So I see a great synergy for the township and the county to be able to work together. I think it seems pretty intuitively obvious that the housing price dilemma, supply shortage, and our vacancy rate, as near as I could find CMHC data, which I think it's effectively zero at the moment, is what the CMHC data shows. So there's a strong interest, and probably the most acute need or demand is in Center Wellington. So again, I'm recommending that we move to strike two subcommittees, one to deal with the financial incentive side and one to deal with the zoning kind of side of things. And we're probably looking at, maybe 4 or 5 volunteers, maximum. Council members can partake as well. We do with the Economic Development Task Force. There's 2 subcommittees there. And they operate more or less independently. Our terms of reference for our committees give us the right to strike subcommittees. Heritage Center Wellington uses subcommittees. So it's a way to get a group of people together to roll up their sleeves and actually get into the mechanics of financial incentives on one side and the policy recommendations on the other side.
Okay, thank you very much. Comments or questions for Brett on that? There's a lot in there. Michael.
Yeah, I think the subcommittee concept is a great idea and will help us act with a greater sense of urgency and get through the items a lot faster. At the end of the last meeting, when we were talking about looking at each item on the list sort of one at a time, one meeting to the next, I was in my mind thinking it's going to be 9-10 months before we've even gone through each of these. Splitting into the groups makes a lot of sense to me. The way they are grouped together seems very logical, and I would volunteer to be a part of what's been identified as subcommittee number 2, the one that's more focused on policy and zoning, because I think I could potentially offer some benefit there, just from my past work experience.
Okay, thank you. Did I see hands? Don?
Yeah, I agree with Michael. It's I'm chair of the economic development, and these 2 subcommittees really work well because you can get right into the weeds of everything, and people can speak freely, and it does get a lot done very quickly.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Who else did I see? Ian?
Yeah, I have to agree that I appreciate the fact that we're looking at subcommittees so that we can move forward and try and address our housing crisis. So I'm certainly willing to serve on whichever committee you'd like me to serve on. My preference would be number 2, but I'll go wherever you need me.
Okay, thank you. Just on that, do we have an idea of the process of fleshing out these subcommittees? Is it just a matter of members volunteering and we get a rough split, or is it something we need to do today? What were you thinking of, Brett, on that?
I think if we get a consensus that we're going to split in 2, I think if people don't want to have a little tally, they could email staff as to which committee they would want to be on. And we can look at who we get, and if people have to move around, that's okay. I don't think anybody should feel compelled that that we're ordering them to participate in either committee as well. I think with economic development, there's a large group of people, and not everybody participates anyway, so that's fine too. I guess, the zoning one, I think everybody has a pretty strong idea of what that means. The financial incentive one maybe is a little more fuzzy. So, and it's not an easy one to step forward for. I think just for everybody's information, with the subcommittees at the Economic Development Task Force, more or less, we're meeting, each of the 2 subcommittees is meeting more or less every other week. So, but only for, an hour and a half each time. So it's not an incredibly large time commitment. I think Mariana could fill in. The heritage ones meet monthly. Would that be? Yeah. So there's flexibility there for how often we meet. Otherwise, I don't think if there's a consensus that those are the 2 subcommittees, then we don't have to get started right away today. It would be nice to, so we know. And then each committee can kind of liaise with staff, and we can decide amongst ourselves sort of how often we meet and look at a timetable. The meetings are done informally, so it's staff that organizes them, as opposed to legislative services staff being required to organize those subcommittee meetings. So, and they can be done over Skype or Zoom. We'll have to set all that up to make sure we have the right tools for organizing the meetings.
Okay, Brian, did I see your hand?
Just a simple thought. I'm hoping, and I'm assuming this is how you would do it, that there would be a member of planning staff on each of the 2 committees for reference and technical input.
Oh yeah, for sure. Either,
right.
Probably one or both of us will be on each of them.
Okay, great.
All right, so anybody else? Marilyn?
Yeah, just quick. If we could figure out, I mean, if you have to think about it, that's great, but it'd be really good to figure this out today so we could get started in my mind. And if we could be clear on what we're talking about, because in the report we referred to it as 1 and 2 differently than what we're talking about. So if we could use the term policy and money to identify which one you want to be on, that'd be clear, because it'd be good if we could have one officer on each, on a staff on each. And if you have to think about it, great. But if you know which one you want to be on, it'd be really good to get that covered off today and get on with it.
Fair enough. I think we have Ian and Michael wanting policy. Tony.
I just have a little question. The objective of these committees would be the subcommittees would be to come back to this committee with some recommendations or options or a menu of tools that we've explored and assessed and can recommend to the group. Is that the general idea, Brett? I guess I'm looking to you for that. I'm assuming that's the case.
Yes, that's the way it rolls, and it may not. Well, what we'll see going forward on our monthly agendas, there'll be a report from the subcommittees, is how we've been doing it with the task force.
Yeah.
And then when there's something, the committees will probably go away and work for a while. There won't necessarily be a recommendation to be brought forward every meeting, but when there is something, then it goes to the whole group for discussion. And then if it goes on to, if it's something that has to go on then to council, then there'll be a full recommendation from the whole of the advisory committee to council.
Okay.
So
Tony, are you going to volunteer?
yeah, the policy thing, I would be napping through the whole thing. So if necessary, I'd be happy to serve on the money one.
Follow the money. All right. Ian.
I just want to say, I'd like to hold back until all the other committee members have chosen which committee they want to be on, and then I'll go on whichever one you need me to.
Okay. For the record, I'll go with the money too, if you want to put me down for that. Who else? Everybody's waving their hands here. Nico. You're still muted.
Okay, I think it would be good to have a heritage perspective on the policy side. So I think I would like to volunteer for the policy part of this.
Okay. So that's, by my count, that's 3-2. Don.
Oops. I'll go on whichever one you want, but it seems like there's a lot of people going on the financial, so I'll go on the policy. I'm okay with that as well.
Just to be clear, which one? Do you prefer one?
Either one of them. I want to get them going. Just
Okay.
so if there's not people on the policy, I'll take the policy position.
I think right now policy is the most popular, but we'll see at the end here. Anybody else? Brian?
I'll go with the money one if I may.
Attaboy, Brian. Okay, money. I think we're even now. That leaves Kathy. We have you.
I have a little more experience with the policy. I've been through that once before, so I would probably choose that one.
Okay. Are we keeping track of all of this? Attaboy, Devlin. Okay. So by my reckoning, I think policy's one ahead, but I'm not sure. And Ian and Don are open to either. How about we split that? Don, are you okay with finance?
Yep, that's fine. Either way, doesn't matter.
And Ian, policy?
Okay.
Where does that leave us, Devlin? There's Andy.
That leaves us with 4 on each committee. I'm just missing Mayor Linton and Councillor Van Leeuwen.
And Steve Wright, presumably.
Correct.
Okay, well, we already have a counselor on policy, so maybe Steve, that puts you on finance?
Yeah, you can put me in finance and I'll see if I can make the meetings. Yeah.
Okay, good. So that leaves the mayor and Steve Wright. Maybe we can wait and see how that works out.
I wouldn't, just through you, Don. Maybe I can reach out to Steve Wright. I'd like to have him on the money part. It'd be really good to have somebody with his experience on the financial incentives piece of it. Kind of reason why he's on the committee. So I can reach out to Steve about that, and I'll just kind of leave myself out, and I'll try to go to as many of both subcommittees as I can.
Yeah, thank you. I was thinking that too. That's a really good point. And I don't know how strict we're going to be. I could envisage a system where you have your membership on the subcommittees, but if an individual member of this whole committee is very interested in some particular topic on a subcommittee, is there anything preventing them from sitting in on a meeting, even if they're not a member? I don't know, but I don't think there's a problem. And I would think certainly the mayor and maybe even both councillors could be able to sit in on either of those groups if they choose to do so. But we can leave that for now. All right, so I think that gives us the membership. One question in terms of process. I know we're going to have an evergreen agenda item for the full committee going forward for subcommittee reports or subcommittee updates. What do we see given once the subcommittees are fully up and running and they're really dealing with the meat of the work of this committee? What do we see full committee meetings doing and their agenda at the same time? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
I guess the point is, does the committee need to meet every month while these subcommittees are working away, or is there enough other things? Are there enough other things we can focus on as a group, waiting for the subcommittees to weigh in, that gives us a reasonable agenda every month?
Yeah, that's through you, Don. That's a really good question. I'm cognizant of the fact that you guys are volunteering your time. And my initial impression is that we hold off on the full meetings for at least for at least a couple months when the subcommittees are meeting, or at least 1 month. I'm open to the group suggestions, but I really don't want to bog us down with meetings if we have the whole group split up in two, rolling up their sleeves, working away on it. We don't want meetings for the sake of meetings right now. I'm really open to the suggestions, the thoughts of the committee and staff on this one.
Don?
The next meeting, Mariana is going to have the report. Now, whether, I hate to do this, Mariana, maybe she could do it to each of the groups without having the whole group tied up. Because I think that's a pretty important document that we'll be basing a lot of stuff on.
Did you want me to comment, Don? I can definitely do that, and I can distribute the report out to the full committee for sure once it's completed. And then we can talk about I think it's good to give the students an opportunity to present their report, but we can do that to the individual subcommittees if that's preferable.
Just practically speaking, are they okay? That means they're doing 2 presentations, two meetings. Is it easier for them to come to the whole group?
Yeah, I can ask that question. I can ask that question and then let you know if they can only get 1 meeting date, because that's obviously school has ended by then. I believe their term ends at the end of April. So I can ask them if they're willing to do 2 meetings, and if not, we can do it maybe at the next meeting date, and then whoever is available to attend can attend. I'm not sure how you wanted to do that.
Well, or we could do 1 more meeting of the full group, do that. That's the agenda, and it's a meeting agenda, and then get that approved and locked in as the targets to the best of our ability. That gives the subcommittee something to work to. And we can confirm the composition of the subcommittees and set them on their way. So that's, to me, that makes sense to have one more meeting to do that. And then, as per the mayor's suggestions, maybe we have a revised schedule of the whole group in light of the fact that the subcommittees are working at that point in time. So that seems a reasonable way to go forward. Andy, did you have a?
Yeah, Don, I like that idea and the fact that if we did the main meeting and then maybe look at June, July, maybe August for the subcommittees to really get action through the summer. In smaller groups might be easier to meet, and then coming back in September to kind of setting, ask the subcommittees to really try to get something established by September. I think it's going to be hard to get everybody together in July and August anyway, with the possibility with maybe some vacations this summer.
No.
But that may be just a good time frame of one more meeting here. The students, let the subcommittees go get some actions moving forward. And then whether it's August or September, we come back and start the group, full group meetings again. I think would be a good plan.
Okay. I think the other thing to think about too in the long term is ultimately the whole committee will have to go through and approve the work of the subcommittees and fashion that into recommendations for council. And the timing of that, of course, is you don't want to get caught up in budget or whatever else is going on at that time, and there'd be further delays. So we'll have to think about that as we go forward. But I guess it all depends on how quickly the subcommittees can get through their work, because there's an awful lot for them to do. Mariana, did I see your hand there?
Yes, sorry, Don, I just wanted to add that I think actually, and in discussing this now, we should have that full meeting, because through the student report that we get, we will probably want as a committee to agree on the definition and targets if they come up, just so we have that working definition we're all working from. So I think it would be useful for the committee to endorse that.
Okay. So that's the next meeting of the full committee, and then we go from there, see where we are. All right. So is that it? Brad? I don't think there was any more to talk about. We all have that information. I know there's other information people have come forward with and probably will. I know we heard a bit about Prince Edward County. We heard what Michael forwarded to us. Is that something we want to keep digging out, or if we come by it, just send it in to inform whatever discussions we have go forward if individual members get information like that? And if so, do they go simply to the clerk for distribution, or do they become a subject of a full committee meeting? But I assume that's what we want to continue to do. Ian?
I was wondering if it would be helpful to everyone, because there is so much information being circulated, if we could have sort of like a central library, online library, where all the information that's being circulated could be stored there. So say, for example, if we have other members switching in and out of the committee, there's one place where we can reference everyone to go to get the material. And maybe also if you had a recommended reading list of information that might be useful to us on the committee to do some background reading, just to understand more of, the themes of what we're dealing with at our community level, as well as what maybe the province, the nation's dealing with. It's just an idea.
And you would run that through legislative services, Devlin?
There are a number of, sorry, I'm
Yeah, go ahead, Brian. I didn't see your hand.
There are a number of other municipalities that we haven't talked about that have, I know, for example, some really interesting financial incentives. So that would be information I'm sure everyone or most of us would like to read. So I'm all in favor of the central library, if we want to call it that.
Bearing in mind that the specific information, if it touches on the work of a particular committee, will be discussed or can be raised at those meetings, gone through in detail. So what you're really looking at is sort of a general reference location for other people just to keep on top of it more than anything, because the actual discussion of it would happen at the committee level, subcommittee level.
Sure.
Okay, anybody? Andy?
Yeah, Don, we'll have to do a little bit of research on a central database for that. Everything we have is on a secure network, so accessing that we kind of restrict that some of the place other than on the website. But I'm sure we can come up with some solution with our IT folks that could just have this group accessing that information and sharing that information. So it's a bit of a not a confidential, but a piece that the committee knows that it's just information going and circulating to the committee.
Okay, well, maybe we can talk about that at our next meeting as well, see if that can, what the mechanics of that might be. Don't want to overcomplicate it. All right, who else have I got left here? Ian.
Thank you, Chairman Don. Just further to what CEO Goldie was mentioning, what I was sort of thinking was something along the lines of our civic website, like current applications, where it's just information that's listed that people can go and download, but people can't upload. So it's sort of a secure system as well. And again, it would be available to the public. If the public wants to understand the challenges we're facing with housing, it's information that they can read as well.
That suits me, but is that something we can discuss all of that at the next meeting and see what the best way forward for that is? But that's kind of what I was thinking as well, so it makes some sense. So anybody else? I know, just as a tangent here, obviously I think there is some public interest in what this committee is doing, and I don't know if all of you are aware, there's been a few articles in Guelph. What is it, Guelph Today, the online newspaper? I know Mayor Linton, you were quoted extensively, as were others. So there is, and believe it or not, people actually do tune in on this. So hello, whoever you are. There is interest, and I think that interest will build over time. So if there is a way that members of the public who are interested can have access to the same information, or at least the same general information that we do, that's probably not a bad idea. So, but we can discuss the details of that at our next meeting. Kelly.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with something you said, and I forgot to mention before. One of the suggestions that Tony actually had at the last meeting was for us to do a little bit of communication out about this group and what it's about and how members are chosen and what we're focusing on right now. So I'll be working with Andy and Kendra, our communications coordinator, to get something out, probably on social media, but we'll work with Kendra on that, just to get some information about what Healthy Growth Advisory Committee is about, what our focus is, because I think it is important for people to understand why this group has been pulled together. And in that, we'll talk about how the focus of this group over the next bit is going to be on taking some real action on more attainable in Center Wellington. So it'd be good to get that out. So we'll be working over the next bit to make sure we're not creating anything new. All this is in the terms of reference, but just making sure that some of those items in the terms of reference for this committee have been sent out to the public so they're aware of what we're doing here. So we'll be working on that over the next couple weeks as well, to get some real facts out there, which facts are important sometimes.
Kathy.
I wonder if it is possible to sort of very briefly put some of the provincial growth plan into that, because I have the idea that a lot of people think that the town can just choose what they want to do and don't really understand that a lot of the intensification is coming from the province. I still have people sort of approaching me and saying, like, why don't we just choose not to do this? Like, you know, so perhaps that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I thought one of Brett's earlier reports to the committee sort of summarized the provincial planning system. Even just having that up there for people to read probably goes a long way to what you were talking about. Steve.
Thanks, Don. Mine are more just questions and bigger picture questions, as I'm new on the committee. when we speak about, because it looks like we've taken the top 2 policy recommendations, we're going to break those down. When we speak about the targets, especially in regards to the University of Guelph and the student project, perhaps I may have missed it because I also get attacked by my cell phone with texts for business here at the same time. But do we talk about, because we talk about what is it a cost for, you know, the average income in the area, and people want to live, they want to remain in their community, so attainable housing. Do we also have that target of, you know, once you create that attainable housing, how does it, like what's the floodgates from the local community, you know, that driving community, and how they would, as soon as you create attainable housing for those who want to stay here, could be gobbled up by by that big bucket of others who want to also move into that attainable housing. So is there a kind of a target of how many people are out in other communities waiting? Because we could create something. So I don't know, maybe that's something you're looking at. And the other piece I'm really curious about is this density bonusing. If we create what's called density bonusing, I think everybody right off the hop thinks, okay, we're going to create apartment buildings and you know, this really strange looking communities where we just jam everybody in. But further down, we speak about, you know, building typologies and construction methods and such. Are we going to create the density bonusing, but none of it comes into effect until we kind of get through the other ones as well, so that we ensure that, okay, we've now created density bonusing, but you can create that density in multiple ways, to ensure that we don't all of a sudden have all these builders saying, okay, we're going to do this, when they didn't realize that we also had some really exciting new ways to build and some exciting ways to create interesting communities, right? So is this all rolling out at once, or is this going to roll out in pieces for our recommendations? Thanks.
Well, I would suggest the density bonusing questions that you raise are going to be discussed in detail at, I guess it's the policy committee or subcommittee where that's been decided, but that's a very good question. I don't know, in terms of the rollout, any thought? Ultimately, everything that we do will go to council, and council maybe will make those decisions. Brett or Andy or Kelly, any thoughts on that? Brett?
Well, just quickly, I guess the recommendation about density bonusing was part of the county attainable housing strategy, which was written predominantly through 2018, 2019. But one of the things that the province has done with Bill 108 is they've taken the prior concept of density bonusing, and that used to be in the Planning Act, where you could, you know, for example, if you had a development and you wanted the developer to say, put another story on it, then in exchange for a bonus or some kind of payment or some community benefit, it could have been, you know, a certain number of affordable units or whatever, then you could allow extra height or density on a building. That's been changed to what the province is now calling a community benefit charge. And the regulations that the province has brought forward only allow a community benefit charge to be applied if a building is 5 stories or more and contains 10 or more units. So that it's a tool that we can examine, but until we talk about whether we are going to allow 5-6-story buildings and have that conversation first, the community benefit or the density bonus is a bit of a moot point. But I think there are also identified specific uses that it can be used for that have to be looked at. So unfortunately, it's one of those things that between the county doing their study and Bill 108 coming out, the rules have changed a little bit. But I would envision that those subcommittees will not bring everything together all at once. It'll be an incremental approach. They could, you know, might decide at the subcommittee level, and I think I would I would recommend to the group that a CIP is one of the most important and significant things that you would do first. But then other things like density boning could be a discussion that follows. I think parkland dedication policies and rules are something else that there's a suggestion that those should be examined as a way to reduce the cost of housing, but that has to be weighed against new infill and might result in us needing to collect more to pay for more green space in areas where intensification is happening. So I think there's room for the subcommittee to get into the details of those things.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Linton.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on, Steve raises a couple good points there, and I just wanted to touch on them, and I'm going to kind of go off what some of the things that Brett said. I agree with where he was going with it. We want to make sure that these subcommittees are set up to wrestle through some of these challenges. Instead of just going, and again, this group here is pulled together because you like action and you want to drive towards solutions real quick. But there's a body of work that has to be done to look at the item called density bonusing. No assumptions whether we're moving in that direction, because there's things that we have to talk about and things that does that work in a small town. So that's where the subcommittee has to really have some real robust discussions and wrestle through that concept of density bonusing. How will that work in Center Wellington? What other municipalities have done it where it has worked and they've been able to keep their small town feel? Those are some real difficult questions that I want that subcommittee to be really digging into and wrestling with. So that's where that work's going to happen. I completely agree with Brett, though. We don't want all these subcommittees to pull together a final report as if you're consultants and then drop it on council's lap. I want to make sure that as we come to some distinct potential action, we bring that to the full committee, and then that distinct action goes to council right away. So if we have something related to CIP that we want to see this town move towards, we want that to go right through this committee onto council, and we can move on that right away and then get on to the next thing. So we want to be moving towards action in all these areas. Once we've had the opportunity to wrestle through it, come with a recommendation, get the approval with this committee, and then bring that over to council for approval. And that's the way I picture that these subcommittees will kind of drive to action as efficiently and as effectively as possible. But we need to go through those difficult questions. These are not simple things. I think we all recognize that it's an important and there's an urgency to it, but we're going to have some real interesting discussions. You know, we're going to have to balance heritage off with attainable housing, you know, making sure that we retain our small town feel, but still allow people to work here. It's not simple. And that's why this group is up for the task. And it's just to really encourage you in those subcommittee meetings, get into it. Like really talk about things and don't leave anything off the table. If you have problems with something, bring it up because these are working groups. And we want to do what's in the best interest of this community so we can be proud of it in 10 years and 20 years. But it means that we're going to all roll up our sleeves and work on this together and ask the difficult questions. Because if we're not doing it in this committee, then we're not set up right. And if ever we feel like we don't have a right resource or we have the right person on a subcommittee, make sure that we bring that up, because if we have to add a subject matter expert or somebody in the community who's really good or understands something, let's bring them in. Let's not be scared of that. So I'm really encouraged. These subcommittees are working groups to roll up our sleeves and really come up with things that we can bring back to the full committee and inevitably bring to council and get some movement.
Okay, Brian.
I'm interested in this is a pro forma thing. Are members of this committee or designated members of this committee able to, for example, reach out to a community where we've identified an effort that's been accomplished or completed, like we're attempting, and actually say, okay, how did that work? Is that, I don't know the sort of formalities. I'm a former newspaper reporter, so I'm not, I'm used to calling whoever I want, but anyway, I realize there are other strictures in this matter.
Andy, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, we get calls all the time from other communities, and it may be just a member of a community saying they're working on something, and if there's something we have, we do share that. So yeah, that's a great way of helping our team do research. And if you keep a list of who you've contacted in case we need to go back and just get some clarity or whatever, that's perfect.
Okay. Anybody else? I just wanted to add, I think, to the mayor's point too, and it's something that I raised a little bit earlier in the meeting. I would hope that even though we've divided up membership of this committee into the subcommittees, that depending on the agendas and the items under discussion at a various subcommittee, any committee member would be entitled to tune in to that particular meeting and contribute, even if they're not actually a member of the subcommittee. Is that? And that maybe goes to what the mayor was saying in a way that's already dealt with. Okay, good. And just another procedural point, I assume each subcommittee, do they go to the point of electing a chair for amongst themselves or someone to drive their agenda process-wise? Do they keep minutes? Do they need Devlin to be there or somebody from Legislative Services? Or are they much more informal than that? How does that work? Anybody?
Generally don't attend subcommittee meetings, but if you'd like me to attend, that's not a problem. And I can give a written update to the whole committee from each subcommittee.
Okay, if you're good with that, I just wonder, do we keep a record of what the subcommittee is doing, in which case you probably have to do that or not. And I guess the other thing is, are these meetings public or not? Or have we thought through that yet?
Well, I'd like to hear from what we do. Like, this is not the first time we've done this. So economic development does this, heritage does this. How do we do it? Like, I don't want to make it onerous. The idea is that we need to keep these as working sessions and that we have decent discussion, but obviously there needs to be a chair for there to be order. I know how crazy you guys all get.
How does it work for economic development or heritage? Mariana?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So typically when we divide into subcommittees, they work informally. They're not open public meetings because they're working sessions, gathering research, discussion, etc. They take informal minutes often just to keep track of the work that they've been doing and their progress, and for ease of reporting back to the full committee. And typically there's a chair that's elected just to keep the agenda going and keep things on track. So that's how we've functioned, and in any sort of committee that I've worked in, that's the way the subcommittees have generally functioned, without a clerk present, with or without. The clerk, I think in our current environment, we're going to have the Zoom meetings scheduled through the clerk's department anyways, but I don't know that it's necessary for them to attend. I think that each subcommittee can elect somebody to take the minutes and a chair to lead the meeting.
Brett?
And just to reiterate, for economic development, the two subcommittees operate the same way. There's, in fact, economic development staff is the one that controls the Zoom account, I think, that gets used for those meetings. So she sends out the invite. There's no participation really of the clerk's department in those subcommittees. They're not advertised public meetings, but it's the reason why there's a report from the subcommittees on every agenda of the full committee. So that's how the public sees what's been going on and what's discussed at the subcommittees, is through the larger committee when there's a report.
Okay, fair enough. Just on that, do committee members, the larger committee members, get prior knowledge of a subcommittee meeting and an agenda, or do they wait to find out after the fact as well at the full committee meeting? Mariana?
Dawn, I think normally what we do is and it would probably help for the subcommittees to arrange a particular meeting date each month, whether it be once a month or twice a month, so that it's a regularly scheduled event that everybody expects. And then that way the full committee is aware of that time. And if they want to attend or drop in or ask for the Zoom invite to the meeting, that could be arranged. But it's probably easier, would facilitate the discussion and everybody knowing when it's happening if they're pre-scheduled meetings. And that way they work with people's schedules as well.
Okay, but that would be accessible to everybody on the committee then. That's what you're saying. Okay, well, we can work through that again. We have one more full committee meeting to deal with the students, to maybe answer any of these questions if they're still outstanding. That would be our next meeting, which is in May. Any other items for discussion today? Any other comments, suggestions? We're all in agreement as a matter of consensus about the two committees and about, we already have membership. So we're good to go starting next meeting. Tony.
I was just going to say, I don't know if we want to wait. I mean, I'm listening to the mayor pointing out that we need to get cracking here. And if we're talking about May and then setting up our first meeting after that, I wonder if we want to strike an initial meeting anyway with the two committees before the next big meeting, even just to get ourselves organized and figure out a meeting schedule and some things like that. And since we're all here now, it seems like a good time for people to pull out their calendars and say, here's what works for me between now and the next meeting.
Sounds like a plan. Anybody to that? Mariana, do you have a thought?
I think maybe staff can facilitate this a little bit at the beginning so that we, now that we know who's on which committee, we can send out emails, ask the committee members what's a good time for them to meet, and then start sending out some Zoom invites and arranging and letting the full committee know this subcommittee will meet on these days. And then that way everybody knows and can begin their work immediately to get into those committees and, you know, getting a chair and getting an agenda going.
Right. So to Tony's point, all that can happen before the next full committee meeting.
Yep.
In May. All right. That sounds like a plan. Anybody else? Anything else? Thank you very much. I think we're adjourned.
Thanks, Don. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Don.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.